Good afternoon. My name is Lalenia Vilanowitz. I am the Conservation and Collections Manager for the Civic Art Division of the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture. Thank you for joining us today. The Civic Art Division commissions and manages the creation of new artwork programs and initiatives for the county, and we support the maintenance and conservation of artworks in the county collection. So I welcome everyone to our second event and second panel, Artist Reflections on Monuments in Public Space, which is part of Illuminate LA, an initiative that spotlights the collective and complex history and memory of our region through the exploration of the county's civic art collection and public artworks in the field. So as we begin, I want to pause and acknowledge the first peoples of this ancestral territory that was seized from them, often violently so. The land that today we call Los Angeles County. With respect to their elders, past and present, we recognize the Tongva, Tataviam, and Chumash as original stewards of this land, air, and water, and support them as they continue to lift up their stories and culture. Our intent with this statement is to show respect, honor the truth, and encourage more substantive, sustained action to correct the false narratives and hostile practices that seek to erase Indigenous peoples' histories and cultures. With this statement, we acknowledge that colonization is an ongoing process, with native land still occupied due to deceptive and broken treaties. Our aim is to counter the destructive doctrine of discovery, which true stories of the people who are already here, and to actively engage in repairing relationships and restorative collaboration with Native communities. In collaboration with the LA City County Native American Indian Commission, the Department of Arts and Culture has been engaging since March of this year with local tribal leaders on the development of a county-wide land acknowledgement, with the intent to also develop toolkits and other resources for county agencies and cultural institutions, and to share with our grantees and other municipalities. We'll continue to update you as these become available. So now kindly help me welcome Kristen Sakota, Director of the Departments of Arts and Culture, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Lalenia. Happy to be here, and thank you. So welcome all, and welcome to Anu, who we have had the pleasure of working with, and welcome to all of our artists and presenters today. I want to just say a few key words. I'll actually start really building on the land acknowledgement that Lalenia provided, because I'm honored to share that at the Department of Arts and Culture for Los Angeles County, we are expanding our family, and we are now becoming the administrative home of the Los Angeles City County Native American Indian Commission. And for the land acknowledgement that we have been working with the NAIC, the Native American Indian Commission, and local tribal representatives to develop, it's actually now officially on the agenda of the Board of Supervisors for their meeting on Tuesday to consider adopting an official land acknowledgement policy and an official land acknowledgement statement on behalf of the County of Los Angeles. So just want to share that that work is moving forward in the largest and most diverse county in the nation. And if you're interested, we can even share the link to the board meeting and the meeting agenda and how this is moving from kind of a policy side of things. I also want to talk a little bit about the power of art and artists and a deep belief in the role of the arts in civic life. And as we think about so many things that come to us, so many issues, so many opportunities to move things on equity, at the heart of it, so many times, is actually deeply rooted narratives that we have about who belongs, about who deserves to be in public space, about what our role is like, what our democracy should be like. And so stories and narratives can harm us. Stories and narratives can heal us. And through it all, what better way than through arts and culture and artists to help us fight erasure and build cultural preservation and build new narratives on the civic agenda that are inclusive and build greater belonging, diversity, equity, and inclusion in Los Angeles. So with that, I'm just excited to hear what all of our artists are going to share. And since I didn't do it at the start, let me take a moment just to describe myself. Again, I'm Kristen Sakota, the director of the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, and I'm speaking to you with an incredible artist background from our civic art collection. And I identify as an African-American woman who is fair-skinned with long auburn locks, some clear hipster glasses, and a smile, and excited to sit around the table and be in community with all of you. Thank you, and back to Lelania.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kristen. I would like to now introduce today's moderator, Anuradha Vikram. She is a writer, curator, and educator of American Indian descent, born in New York and based in Los Angeles. Her book, Decolonizing Culture, helped initiate a global movement to decolonize arts institutions and monuments. She teaches global modernism at UCLA's Department of Art and is a guest curator for UCLA Art Science Center exhibition as part of the Getty's Pacific Standard Times Art and Science Initiative in 2024. Anuradha, you can now take over and introduce us to our panel.
Thank you so much, Lelania. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Just quickly to clarify and be accurate, I am Indian American. And so just I always think it's really interesting to also frame a conversation between, communities that share a common misnomer, as it were, in the English language. So happy to be here, and thank you so much for entrusting me with this program, Illuminate LA. So in our first conversation in September, we talked with civic arts leaders and scholars about monuments and why monuments, how we're treating monuments, particularly those that reflect contested histories. And one of the imperatives that we see is to represent different histories and to represent histories differently. I guess those are two different imperatives. And so today's program is motivated by another approach, maybe an unmonumental approach. These artists have been invited to record audio tours that will guide us through locations in and around downtown Los Angeles. Those locations are chosen on the basis of the artist's personal histories, as well as you'll hear, larger historical trends that intersect with the artist's personal histories. We've recorded now 2 of 5 conversations, and we're happy to have 4 of the 5 artists with us today. We will be releasing these audio tours over the next 2 to 3 months. So we're looking forward to the first one releasing next week. And we'll be letting them, we'll be turning them out, putting them out every, say 2 to 3 weeks, avoiding the holidays. And otherwise you can expect to see one from now, pretty regularly from now until January. So I'm really pleased to be able to welcome today the artists who have been creating these wonderful tours for us. The first artist is Alan Nakagawa, Carmen Argote. I'm sorry, let me do a little bio reading. I hate bio reading, so as you can see, I'm trying to avoid it. Give me 1 second here. I have them all, and then they're on the wrong screen. There we go. Okay, so Alan Nakagawa is an interdisciplinary artist with archiving tendencies, primarily working with sound, often incorporating various media and working with communities and their histories. Carmen Argote's process-based practice is derived from her environs and corporeal connections. The act of walking and movement is an integral part of her practice and transforms the body into her studio. Her search for visual fragments conceptualizes the construction of ideas, and aesthetics and materials begin to emerge. Next slide, please. Thank you. Sebastian Hernandez is a multidisciplinary trans femme artist who explores making art with mediums like movement, sculpture, performance, photography, creative writing, and DJing. Hernandez works with and through feminist, queer, indigenous, and gender theoretical frameworks, as well as notions of collectivity, to generate works that shift and complicate Mexican and Chicano narratives in the contemporaneous social imagination. and Isaac Michael Ybarra, who is an avid scholar, artist, and poet, currently studying mass media communication, California State University of Northridge, and also art history at the CSU International Program in Florence, Italy. Isaac Michael represents his indigenous roots through the cultural ideologies of First Nations in the Americas. He is a descendant of the Southwest in the United States, and Isaac participated in the international performance troupe Virtual Verite, led by Harry Gamboa Jr. So we're delighted, thrilled to have these wonderful artists with us today. Each of them is going to talk us through a little bit of their history in Los Angeles, and then we're going to have a conversation. And we hope that you, our audience today, will also please join the conversation and consider what questions you have about these artists' experience in LA. So we'll start with Alan. The first question I have for each of the artists is, of the different sites, each artist chosen 4 to 5 sites to talk about on the audio tour. We've asked each to select one site today to quickly introduce us to. So Alan, would you kick us off by speaking about this site at 3929 West Olympic Boulevard?
Yes. So this is a corner of Norton and Olympic in an area that doesn't get talked about very much, but had a heavily Japanese immigrant population from the late 50s till about the mid 70s, I would say. And this particular corner was the restaurant that my mom and dad owned. They ran this restaurant for about 13 years. And it's now a Korean restaurant, which is pretty amazing. It's the place where the crew and cast of Parasite did their infamous after party after the Oscars till 4 or 5 in the morning. But back in the 60s and 70s, it was a Japanese restaurant called Benibasha. And about 10 years ago, I guess, I received the COLA, which is the City of LA Artist Fellowship. And when I received it, I was 49 years old, and that's the age that my father died. He died when he was 49. And so I decided to do the piece that you're supposed to be in the show. So I did an installation in homage to him. And for the research, I decided to go back to the restaurant. At the time, it was a Korean restaurant. And my friends came with me, and my daughter, and we sat there. And I think the owner was already prepped on we were going to go there. And so they kind of heard about us. And towards the end of the evening, which was fantastic, they were very welcoming, and we had a great time. The meal was amazing. I asked, can I look at the kitchen? And I was so surprised to see the same stove there. I mean, my dad sold it in 1982, and this would have been what, 2011 or something like that. And the stove's still there. And the sink was also the same. Everything else had changed, but that was really heartwarming to me. And it's I think there's only really one shop left from that era, and it's called House of Breakfast. It's on the next block, but everything else has changed, and rightly so. It's been a pretty long time, and it's this relationship with the past, and very, like hyper past and hyper local, that I often find myself talking about in my work, and definitely most recently that's been more so.
In your tour, you talked a bit about growing up in the neighborhood around this restaurant as well. Will you just run us down what are the other locations that you remember from being around here?
Well, my school is still there, Wilton Place Elementary School. That's changed dramatically since I went there. The front is the same. And so whenever I pass by it, and I pass by that school a lot, I always remember the first fight and only fight I've ever been in is in the specific area of the lawn in front of the school. And every time I pass that thing, I remember the fight and what happened after the fight. And the person I fought with, and I think we were in the 3rd grade, became my best friend, right? And so that's always a funny memory to me. I was there recently getting my COVID booster shot, and I was literally in the playground of the kindergarten. And I've talked about this often, but that's the place when I was in kindergarten when I first realized I had tinnitus. And I mentioned that story a lot. So it was fun to be, and weird to be there getting a COVID shot, you know. So the area, I'm glad that I get to still be in this area. It grounds me in a certain way. I see the changes a lot. You know, there's been quite a few changes throughout the decades. But you know, it's where I choose to stay, and luckily I'm able to stay here through my family. So it's probably what influences my work, in the sense that I always find myself in archives or adjacent to archives, or in a situation where I need to create an archive. And it's just something that is so obvious in my work now that it took me a really long time to realize that not everyone's interested in that kind of stuff. And now here I am. So, you know, a lot of gratitude.
Thank you. So let's move to the next slide. Carmen, I think that's you. Yes. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the library?
Yeah. So the Los Angeles Public Library has been sort of this presence, this consistent presence in my life. And I really got to know it in high school because I went to the Downtown Business Magnet, Fashion Career Center, Electronic Information Magnet from 1996, and I graduated in 1999. And the area that you know I had chosen was the Electronic Information Magnet. And anyway, we had our classes, or we had some of our classes inside the library, because the high school was on Temple and Beaudry, and it was sort of in this, I don't know, like, maybe, I'm not sure why, but it was like, okay, we're gonna take the students to the library so they could learn how to research and be among books. And so in high school, I remember that sometimes we would have an off-campus pass, and you know, instead of busing to the library, some of us might be able to walk there. So I remember like the walks to and from my high school to the library. I also remember, you know, going into like the rare books sort of room, and we would get these sort of very generalized tours by the librarians in terms of how to use the microfiche and how to, like, you know, like use the different things. But I just remember walking around the library between the stacks of books, and you know, also like with my friends, and you know, all the things that happen in high school between the books, and kind of playing almost like hide and seek. And it became this space that felt very known to me. There's the architectural kind of layout became really imprinted in terms of a place that I knew how to navigate around. And then, you know, I think more presently during my walks, I've stopped by the library a lot. I do these very long walks, sometimes 3 hours long, and the library has been this in between space between my childhood home in Westlake MacArthur Park and like going to Boyle Heights, my current home. And so there's like a couple of stops where there's a bathroom that I like to use, and then there's a water fountain. And so more presently, this is kind of like one of the important stops on the route of just processing and being in LA. And it feels like a known space for me. As I walk around there, in like the garden, in the front garden, I sometimes just kind of visit, and I do think about, all the different kind of stages of my life that I've passed by this place. There's a certain comfort in knowing that the escalators are in the same place, or that I remember when they first installed like these almost like chandelier like works inside the library, and it's almost like a time machine where I can kind of see the many layers of my life. There's the bench where I me and my high school boyfriend at the time had made out, and I passed by it, and it just sort of brings back those little moments, and it layers those moments with the like more recent moments. It layers those moments with me walking around there in 2020 and 2021, and really seeing how the library was functioning, and really I think it's a very radical space, and I love that there's the Bunker Hill steps here, because that's also like, so from that door, that's like the nearest like water fountain, and then I just usually go up. It's part of an essential part of my walking route.
And your tour is going to include water fountain stations, if I remember correctly. Yes.
Yes.
So there's a mindfulness of the body built into the tour.
Yeah, and and a relationship of exactly like the body and what is needed to continue. By the time I get here, I'm very thirsty, and I and I need to pee usually. And there's something about the shape of the top of the building that it's just one of those markers for me. There's a couple that make me feel at home, and it really hasn't changed since high school. And it's one of those areas in downtown LA that I feel has kind of stayed the same since the 90s predominantly. And that oddly brings, I don't know, like some kind of stability in my life. There's the Arco Tower across the way, there's the garden, there's, like the plaza. Things do change, maybe like certain restaurants come and go, but the structure, like nothing's been demolished around it. So it brings a little, in a city where things are constantly like almost like disappearing, reappearing in different forms. This sort of area of downtown LA kind of feels very familiar.
Great. That's actually one of the questions we're going to discuss. So let's move on right now. But the question is, of course, what's changing? What's staying the same? So the next site, this is Sebastian's site, and it's 215 Main Street. Sebastian, would you like to tell us about it?
Hi. Hello, everybody. So in 2019, around the time of 2019, where I was like probably 28, I guess I should just say very quickly that I think this has been like a very challenging work for me, I guess, in a way, because memory to me is, I don't hold on to memories very well, like at all, and so this has been like a very like challenging thing for me. And so, but it's been nice, kind of. And so, but I try to have these performances that hopefully help me kind of like, through performance, I generate and I go and synthesize through the information and the history of like this specific site, I suppose, which is the Cooper Donuts establishment, I guess. That was like that was open in 1959 in Skid Row. And I think something that I found along the research of this site was that there was a lot of like there's a lot of discrepancies as to where exactly the Cooper Donut store restaurant was located. And I do remember it moved around like once or twice. And so 215 is, I don't know if it was the first one or it was the second one, but the curator had told me that it was essentially in front of the Nickel Diner, which is downtown and still exists. And I wanted to share screen real quick if I can do that. If somebody can let me screen share while other participant is sharing. Can someone let me screen share? Oh,
You should be able to share now.
okay, okay, that one's a little extreme, my ass. Everyone's there. So I wanted to go to Nickel Diner. So that's Nickel Diner here, where we actually had a site visit there, and we were going to have the performance there happen actually. And then I don't exactly know what happened. Probably they just didn't like my idea, which, performance artists constantly get, bashed for. So I think we just ended up doing it at Naval. And so the importance of this performance and this site for me is, I guess the curator kind of wanted to have a conversation about the Cooper Donut riot happening prior to, give me 1 second. Prior to the Stonewall riot, basically. And so, yeah, I saw what they were trying to do, but I felt like it was just more important to focus on just the site itself and not kind of gay history trying to rewrite itself or something, or trying to make a claim that actually the Cooper Donut riot was the first queer trans riot for gay rights or something. So anyways, I don't know, it's a complicated subject, but at some point I just kind of saw and synthesized all the complexities and the problems with the way that the curator wanted to see it and the way that I wanted to sort through it, because it's 2019 at this point. And so yeah, let me just very quickly talk about the excerpt about what happened at Cooper Donuts. So one evening, 2 police officers asked for IDs from some customers at the shop, a typical way for them to harass LGBT. This is 1959. Those who were picked out of the crowd, including John Reschke, which is the writer that we have this anecdote about the Cooper Donut riot. And so an accomplished gay author who has written about the uprising were 2 hustlers, 2 queens, and a young man just cruising. That sounds so funny. Something snapped in one of them. Enough was enough. He objected to the car being packed with 5 people and fought back, leading the customers at the donut shop to flood into the streets, throwing coffee, cups, trash, spoons, donuts, anything they could get their hands on. And the officers fled into the car. Reschke writes, called backups, and soon the street was bustling with disobedience. Gay people danced about the cars. It sounds very, I don't know, just to me, it sounds a little cheesy. I'm not sure if it really happened that way, but whatever, it is what it is. And so I think when I wanted to do this performance, I kind of I knew that happened, and I took it in and then I kind of just threw it to the trash essentially and brought it to 2019. And I was just like, well, what do I want to do right now? Like, and I wanted to bring all like the feminine energy around me into a performance. And so these 4 muses were a part of that: Nico, Dico, and Miguel. And then I'm over. This is Dico, this is Nico, and then this is Miguel, and then this is me over here. But I mean, I can keep going about Pistol, but yeah, I don't know if that.
We talk about it in the tour, so
Yeah, I talk about.
yeah, maybe just talk a little bit about the process of looking at like different possible locations where the Cooper Donut, right, or where the Cooper Donuts could have been, and what does it mean when you don't exactly know whether it happened, where it happened, what exactly happened?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it just makes me think that I'm like, I'm just like not in the archive like that, so I can't be a professional about it in regards to like knowing exactly the details and the facts about everything. But there is an extensive research on it. To me, when I went through it, it just everything didn't really match, and it was just like too much space to kind of be wrong essentially. So I don't want to be wrong, so I was just like, but in regards to the site, I met with like 2 butch lesbians. I think they were together, I'm not sure, that owned the Nickel Diner, but I think there was somebody else that they had to go through the Nickel Diner thing. And so yeah,
It's interesting that it's still a queer site in a way.
yeah, it is kind of interesting. And the way that the curator was able to, the curator was white, these 2 lesbian women were white, so I'm assuming, I don't know, there's just connections and networks there still. But I think there was a white man that they had to talk to, and I think that's who eventually said no.
Mhm.
So but yeah, that's a little bit about the site.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about who controls space later on. Thank you for that. Okay, so let me grab the screen back from you.
Yeah, sorry, let me stop sharing.
Let's have to get my own thing back up. 1 second here. Sorry, I'm on the wrong page, so give me just 1 second. Okay, so our last site that we're going to discuss before we have our conversation is Isaac Michael's site, the Placita Olivera.
Yeah, so this site I chose is La Iglesia de Nuestra Señora de los Angeles, or the church, Our Lady of Los Angeles. And I specifically chose this site, this spot. I don't remember the year. Must have been less than 10 years ago. They deconstructed and reconstructed the space around the church. And during that process, they, of course, found ancestral remains in mass graves surrounding the area. So the specific spot that I chose was actually the mass grave adjacent to the church that was reconstructed as a garden to honor those who were buried, which were not only Tongva, Chumash, possibly Ahachman, and other indigenous peoples within the area, but also there was some settlers from Mexico. Oh my God, this is the neighbors. I don't know what's going on here. I'm sorry if you guys can hear all that. But yeah, it was not like this 20 minutes ago.
Los Angeles demands to be heard.
Yeah, that's right. So where can I go from there?
Well, so this site, and I think it's over here in the photo, it's this spot where we see the low fence. Is that correct? where
You see
they've
the
now
what?
constructed. I'm just looking at the archival photo that we have. Is that roughly now if you go to visit the site, the garden is in that
Oh,
kind of area,
the
right?
JP on the left side, yeah,
Yeah.
of the church that we're looking at now. Yeah.
Mhm.
And there's a low fence that blocks off the garden, you know, adjacent to another museum, the Latino, I think, the Latino Museum of
The
Contemporary.
plaza, I think. Yeah,
That was called, yeah.
right.
And along the gate are words in different languages from English, Spanish, Tongva, Hachman, and I think even some Smuj language words are in there.
So this site represents the removal of Indigenous people because it's a mass grave. What about the life of Indigenous people that was here? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this site was actually, I mean, before this church was another church that was actually a sub-mission or an assistant mission to the San Gabriel mission, which was constructed on the village of Yanga, a village in downtown LA. And it was built to assist the mission by, really this whole area was what's the word? It was a farm with crops, and this is where the food that was raised to feed the San Gabriel mission was. So this is why I chose this site to honor my ancestors and the other people who suffered, but also the people who lived and lived in an honored life before this mission. I think it's a monument that stands, but we should understand what that monument represents and the history of it. And I think sometimes it's misunderstood or forgotten.
Thank you. And then I neglected to mention earlier when I introduced you about your artist in residence project with Metzley Projects, which I would imagine relates as well to what we're talking about. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm an artist in residency with and a cultural apprentice with the Metzley Arts Projects. Metzley is, I cannot concentrate. Yeah, so we're doing a lot of different projects, and it's really an art collective with Indigenous people by Indigenous people. Well, I should say it was founded by Indigenous people of LA with the intention of creating and teaching in Indigenous ways.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, let's move to discussion. I think one of the wonderful things that we noticed was that the artists often overlapped too in terms of what places they were interested in talking about. So I will take these off the screen in a minute so we can just all see each other and the audience can see us. But I did want to put them up for a moment just so everyone can read them, have a minute to think about them. And also for those of you who are in the audience, we do want to encourage you to ask questions as well. So I thought maybe it would be helpful if you saw the questions that I have. And that way you can also think about what you don't see being asked here, that you can get a little head start in thinking about what you would like to add to the conversation. So please, this is hopefully going to be a dialogue that involves the public as well. But we'll start with a few questions that I have for our artists. So the first question is to tell us about your background in LA. Were you born here? What neighborhoods did you grow up in and frequent? And where is your family from ancestrally? So I think we'll do that in chronological order. So Isaac, Michael, let's have you go first.
Answer all of those questions or just the first one?
You can answer them all if you like to, or just the first one if you prefer.
Cool, yeah. So the question was, tell us about your background in LA. Were you born here? What neighborhoods did you frequent, right?
Yeah. And
So
where are your ancestors from as well?
Okay, so I was born in Lancaster, which is still LA County, and I grew up a lot. I moved around a lot in LA County. But I often came to LA, downtown city. And I enjoyed the space here. I enjoyed, like I said, reconnecting and trying to understand how this artificial space once was. That's what really drew me to downtown a lot. Now I live in downtown, or I live in Echo Park, which is really close. But my family ancestrally, I'm from the Santa Monica Mountains, the Mojave Desert, and central Mexico. So I'm Tongva, Chumash, and Chicano with some other indigenous roots, like I said, in the Mojave Desert.
Thank you. All right. I don't know what direction to move. I think I'll move to Sebastian next.
Hi. So I was born in Los Angeles, probably like in East LA, but I grew up most of my life in Huntington Park, which is 10 to 15 minutes down from downtown. Like if you take Santa Fe all the way off of 7th Street. So I've been here most of my life. I went to Berkeley for 3 years, so the Bay Area for 3 years. And then I came back, and then my parents are both from Mexico. They identify as Mexican. I identify as Mexican American, Indigenous, Aztec, Mexica. Yeah, I don't know if that, I think that answered everything.
Do you know when your family came to LA?
I don't know. My dad was the first. He came over first by himself. And then he brought my mother over, and then I came. I think I was the first one born here, so I don't know. Like I was born in 1990, so I don't really know their story. It's kind of traumatic. I don't like asking about it. So yeah.
Thanks. Okay, Carmen.
Hi. I was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, and in '81, and then my family and I came to LA. I think like when I was 4 or 5. I'm kind of unclear. So that would be, I don't know, like 1985. And I grew up in a house that my grandmother owns near Westlake MacArthur Park, like near Olympic and Hoover, like or like actually a little bit up. That was my bus stop. So I think about like place in terms of bus stops and like I don't know, like all that stuff. But
Me too.
yeah. And then what was the other part of the question? Is that
Just yeah, it was where do you hang out? I think you answered all the question.
okay,
Yeah.
great.
Thank you. Alan?
I was born here in Los Angeles, and my family's from Japan, and my mom's side of the family is from Hiroshima. My dad's side of the family is from Chiba, which is the next prefecture next to Tokyo. And what neighborhoods did we frequent? I was the firstborn and the only grandkid, I guess, for 5 years, pretty much. So I would tag along everybody. My mom is the oldest, so I had all these teenage aunts and uncles to hang out with.
Mm.
They would take me to Little Tokyo. I was like their toy. So, and then my father was a chef. And when I was growing up, he worked at this place called Yamato, which was a fancy Japanese restaurant in Century City. Like some of the clientele were like Louis Armstrong and Doris Day and all these kinds of people. And I remember hanging out with the staff at bowling alleys, and they would take me to Marineland because I think my dad was one of the
Oh,
few that were married and had kids. So
Marineland.
Yeah, Marineland.
I remember that. I had the t-shirt.
And what was the other one in Buena Park? Of course, there's Knott's Berry Farm, but there used to be, I think it was called Japanese Deer Park. We used to go to that, which in hindsight must have been pretty surreal for everybody to go to Japanese deer park. I don't know if anybody remembers that. The last image Los Angelinos had of Deer Park was on the news, the helicopters hovering over the park, and you hear one shotgun shell after another because all the deers had developed some sort of disease and they had to kill all of them. I
my
remember being a
God.
little kid watching the news and just hearing,
That's
you know,
traumatic.
it was pretty
Yeah.
intense. Yeah.
I forgot something. Can I add something?
Yeah,
in
please, go
here?
ahead.
I was thinking about just like the early mornings of going to school, and I guess like the neighborhoods that I frequented really depended on like where I was going to school, like or like for the magnet program. So it was like from my neighborhood near Westlake MacArthur Park to Brentwood Science Magnet, and then from my neighborhood to East LA and junior high, like to Griffith Middle School, and then from like my neighborhood to downtown LA for for high school. And so and I also forgot to mention that both my parents were born and raised in Mexico, in Guadalajara as well. So it was just growing up with and my aunts and uncles, most of them, except two, grew up in Mexico. So that it was very much like that kind of mixture of being here and also like having I don't know, like people who were raised and born there.
I also wanted to add, because I think I said my parents are just from Mexico, but they're like from the city of Mexico, like the outskirts, hood, which is a lot. So yeah. So they're like Chilangos or like from the or I don't know if you want to say Ciudad Mexico now or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anu, I did want to ask if you wanted to like answer this question too. I personally would.
How I came here?
Yeah, just like the same question.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I'm a migrant myself. I was born in the United States, but I was born on the East Coast. I came to California in 2002. I came to LA in 2014 and I came for work. So I'm definitely, full on economic migrant, but I'm also descended from refugees. So I think that movement, that global movement started a couple generations ago in my family. And once you're displaced, I think this is a really interesting kind of problem, right? In terms of how we reconcile settlers and settlement with migration and, the way in which human history continues to create refugees and migrants. And once you are uprooted, you kind of keep on being moved and keep on being moved. And so I think it's really important actually to figure out like how to approach and how to sort of get permission to live in a place, you know what I mean? And so I've really thought about that, especially coming to LA, where I think this conversation about land acknowledgement and land return is very robust. So, I'm grateful that LA has given me a place to land. My parents are from India, or what was India. My dad's side of the family is actually from Pakistan today, but at that time it was still India, and they were a partition family, which means that when India was granted independence and Pakistan was separated, they had to leave. And so they ended up in Delhi, like a lot of Punjabi refugees. And yeah, where do I hang out? I live in West Adams. I worked in Santa Monica for many years. It was what brought me here. But since I left that role, I've been spending more and more time downtown and in places like Echo Park and Silver Lake, and that I've never really been in before. I've, gotten to know places east of the river a little bit better. I really like the fact that actually LA has so many different communities, neighborhoods, and sometimes you have to travel, especially for food. So I think for me though, like I'm a driver, it's been a driving experience. And it's really interesting to hear, like, when of course, when you're young and you don't have a car, you learn to place a totally different way because you have to walk it, bicycle it, take buses, and some people, do that their whole lives. But when you're an adult, especially with kids like me, I think, car becomes your reality. And it's a very different experience. In some ways, a very limiting experience.
Thank you. I don't know.
So let's talk a little bit about changes. Carmen, you talked a little bit about how the area around the Central Library has stayed the same. What isn't the same?
What isn't the same? Well, I mean, kind of grow, like I mean, there's so many things that aren't the same, but they're kind of the same. Like around that area, I remember like there was like going to my mom to like the Broadway, and then that was Macy's, and before that I think it was like Robinson's May, or like like the different shops kind of keep moving. There was like a restaurant that was in business, and all of a sudden it's like gone, that I like went on like just with some friends. And but the structure is the same. Like Argo Plaza is still there. That like basement underneath Arco Plaza is still there. The Bonaventure Hotel is still there. Even though they keep changing the, the inside slightly. Within the library, I mean, they have like new tools and new things, but the architecture and the sort of like the public art might still be the same, actually. So the buses are a little different now. I do remember like the RTD buses, then Metro, then, like all the buses used to go to downtown. So it was just a lot easier to get to downtown from anywhere, but they're still kind of going. What isn't the same, I guess? I don't know. I mean, it's also like where I was in my, like it's different experiencing downtown as a child than experiencing it as a teenager, experiencing it in like the many different stages of adulthood, experiencing it at like 2 a.m. at night when I'm like, if I'm walking there, experiencing it at like different times of day. You kind of start seeing like, things cycle. I mean, one of the things that is different is the, definitely an increase in people using the library for housing, for some kind of stability. I mean, I think during the pandemic, the library really was one of those sites where people, found shelter and found like resources to kind of gather, even in the garden. And then like before, like it was completely like, like closed down, like people would go and sit there and we just kind of share space, like it feels like a safe kind of gathering place for the public, for people in the city. What else has changed? The Bonaventure is another water fountain bathroom, by the way. City Court Plaza, now it's like a Target, or like, I mean, I don't even go there anymore. I like it's too much. There's a huge increase in like the loft living kind of thing came in, and then it just kind of changed the flow of things, which seems like some of it, like there's a lot still there, but I think like especially around the library, maybe because the work structure hasn't changed, like the people like working the 9 to 5 hasn't changed, except during the pandemic when it went like completely empty. And it was fascinating. It was just just walking on the streets and seeing, this that's where the city, that's when the city was paving over the roads and everything. Like they were doing a lot of like maintenance when nobody was there. I was there, I guess. I mean, so it's not nobody, but um I'm just glad Arco Plaza is still there and I can go into like that cave-like environment. And I'm just there, like the Bon, like I'm happy the Bonaventure is there and like the YMCA is there, and you know, the big markers are there to kind of give me that feeling of place. Um, I have this very specific memory during the pandemic. I mean, we're still in it, but I took like I had my lunch and there was like some chairs on those Bunker Hill steps, and I just like had lunch, like looking at the library there by myself. It was like it was a moment. It was a moment of just like, okay, this is still here. Like it was odd. Like I'm safe. Like this is still here. I'm safe. Like this, like odd connections.
It's so interesting, and I think this is sort of also maybe because of the appearance of the reptilian friend that we now have as well. Thinking the way you were talking about it, it's like, you know, downtown, when I think about downtown, especially if I think about something like the Westin Bonaventure, right, which has this also like this whole history with Frederick Jameson, the postmodern theorist, having written about it as like this architectural epitome of postmodernism as a cultural phenomenon, as this kind of almost corporatist recycling of different motifs and so on, kind of corporate phenomenon, right? Cultural phenomenon rather. And yet when you describe it, it's like a habitat. Like you make anything into a habitat, even the most overbuilt, you know, concrete and granite environment like downtown.
It's a water station and bathroom, and it's
That's
like
right. And a cave to hide in.
That's a cave.
And I love that, just how it brings it back to like our animal natures and what we need, which is shelter, right? And places to relieve ourselves. Alan, can you talk to us a little bit about downtown? What do you remember of downtown from when you were a kid?
You know, I didn't really go to downtown until I was an adult. We only stayed in Little Tokyo. The Japanese immigrant population, Japanese American population, they're very xenophobic. They only like to stay in their own areas, for the most part, unless it has to do with basketball, I guess. The only memory I have of downtown LA is picking up my grandmother at she was a seamstress at a really old building. I have to ask my family if that building's still there. I periodically look for it, but I don't really know where I'm supposed to look for it. So I have this feeling it's not there anymore. But my aunt used to drive there and have me and my cousins in the back seat, and then we would wait across the street. And there was this moment where the doors would open and all these women would flock out, and then one of them was my grandmother. And
I think
that's
one of them was my grandmother too, probably.
there was a time when it was you can make a living doing that. That all changed, I think, I'm told, in the 80s or 90s or something.
Yeah.
But I didn't really get to know downtown till my early adulthood, when I was hired by the Los Angeles County Transportation Commission. You know, then our offices were at 7th and Figueroa. You know, and all of a sudden I had to wear a suit and tie, and I was fresh out of art school, and all of a sudden I had this government job, and I was in public transportation. You know, it was just very surreal. I remember the first week I had a panic attack because it was just such a change in culture for me. Coming out of Spark, you know, I was working for Judy Baca, and then all of a sudden I was in a suit and tie, with all these other suits and ties and, you know, business attire people all over downtown LA. So my connection to downtown starts in my adulthood. I don't really have one. per se. I'd never been to there was no reason to go to City Hall. I didn't go to City Hall until I worked for LACTC, which would of course eventually wed with RTD that Carmen
Mhm.
brought up and become Metro.
Mhm.
So
Alan, did I meet you at Metro when I was interning, like in high, like it
yeah,
was that,
you were our
so yeah,
intern.
I was the intern. So I was trying to get like a job when I was a teenager. Like I was a little older, right? But I went to Metro, and then Alan was working there, and I remember I was like organizing the slide library, like the slide.
We had slides back then, yeah.
And I had to
Those are
put them
bread
in
and
the
butter.
little sleeve. Yeah. Oh man.
Absolutely.
And my mother, like my mother and grandmother worked in the fashion industry in the
Oh,
80s. And then when it stopped, then like my mother was out of a job because like she was making pretty good money, and then it just kind of was like it just stopped.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it got sent overseas. Is that what happened?
I would imagine so. I think there was a whole like all the designers and all the like it was done in like here, and then it just like the industry just like
A couple of things happened. I think that happened,
Oh.
and also the deunionizing of that industry happened as well.
So the wages also dropped if you were
That's
still
exactly
Wow.
right.
working.
And so they were able to, take advantage of that, and then and really take advantage of that,
Mhm.
So I'm
Yeah.
struck that so far what we've heard is really like downtown is a place for working, right? Downtown is where you go to school, especially since you were going to Business Magnet. Downtown is where you go to, use computers at the library, do your research. It's where you go to work in the factory. So I'm curious to hear from Sebastian and Isaac Michael, any other memories of downtown that don't involve going to work?
Yeah, always, checking out the art or just public space, like I said, and going down there and trying to reimagine, what would I do to reclaim this and fix this erasure that's, going on. But some things that I have noticed like more recently, since I've been walking around these past like 5 years, I'd say, is like, homeless encampments being moved or shuttled into other areas where they're hidden. I mean, I don't know if everybody remembers what happened in Echo Park when people were using space at the park because there was nowhere else to go, and then police riot police came and forcefully, what's the word,
Remove them.
moved people. Yeah, and then those people had nowhere to go. And then I remember shortly after that, signs being put up on light poles and all over the city saying, restricting access during certain times of the day or certain times at night. No sleeping, no gathering. That's the stuff that I've been noticing and remembering in downtown areas. Some of the stuff that I think stays the same is the stench or the smog in the air, but also, resiliency and people's spirit and people. I don't want to just say just the youth, but people in general who are about, making things right and revolutionizing the way we live. I've seen a lot of like murals go up in the past few years. I've also seen a lot of murals and public art being disrespected and what's the other word? Altered. Those are some of the notices and change I've seen in downtown.
So do you feel like there's more of a people's presence downtown than there was?
Oh, definitely, because I think there's a big, I can see the movement around, authoritative figures trying to restrict that. We've seen the women's marches, we've seen the rallies against Trump, we've seen, I can't think of his name right now. Oh my God. What's his name? Somebody knows. 2019, 2020. The person that was
Oh, the George Floyd.
George Floyd,
movement,
thank
yeah.
you.
Mhm.
And that wasn't just about George Floyd, right? That was about everything. And
Yeah.
and then overnight it was kind of just forgotten because of how restricted. And I mean, I was there, the National Guard was there, police from everywhere was there, and then
Wow.
people came out from all over, and people who weren't even from downtown LA. And it was kind of unorganized, but it was just it was the people, it was the presence of the people,
Hmm.
you know. So when there's a reaction of authority figures trying to control that, there's definitely a big presence.
Thank
I
you.
feel like uh downtown was pretty active, I think, before COVID, and
It's asleep.
yeah.
Don't say it's not active though, because you know, I think
Hmm.
I understand what I think I know where you're going with it, you know, and I feel the same way. I feel like it's starting to, it's been put asleep, you know.
What? I don't understand.
So before COVID, though, it was a place where you would go for socialization too, like for fun.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I was just thinking about like why I would go downtown, and a lot of it was me going to explore the bars or the art walk, and that would be like me walking the streets, or like Seventh and Flower, the plaza there to buy clothes or something. And that was basically it, or else I was just going through it to get to Santa Monica. So I had to take the 760 to get to downtown, and then there was a blue bus that'll take me to Santa Monica because I was studying
Hmm.
at Santa Monica Community College for 6 years or something. Um, but I felt like it was pre-COVID was pretty kind of like active in like with the art walks and all that. And then the pandemic happened, and then yeah, we are still in it, I think, and people are coming out of it still kind of very slowly. And so I think one of the major things that I feel that comes up to mind is Broadway. How Broadway
Broadway.
just feels like the theaters were always on Broadway, which is funny because theaters, and there's like this New York, they want to kind of like LA wants to replicate
Hmm.
New York or East Coast. So like the theaters are being like refurbished or whatever, reconstructed. And like there's 3 major theaters now there. And so I feel like that's the major thing that to me, I'm like, oh, Broadway's like popping or something, or like there's a lot of commerce. The food market is on Broadway. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Broadway is the major
Hmm.
thing for me at the moment.
Yeah, like the 66 bus would go to Broadway, and that's what, like, on Saturdays or Sundays, like that's what we would go do. Like it was just walking on Broadway, right? Like looking at the jewelry shops, just looking, because just looking, and then like passing by, maybe like stopping at like, like buying some clothes, maybe, but it was just about walking, just being there. I honestly, like when I was a kid, I don't remember the theaters except like the signs, just
Yeah,
like
I don't
those are the
remember the
signs.
theaters either. Like
Yeah.
they're like storefronts, or they were
Hmm.
storefronts before pandemic, and now some of them becoming actual theaters because they're like getting the.
Hmm.
So yeah, now it's like now actually see theaters being alive in LA or something. So
Hmm.
yeah.
So then the next question I want to ask you is, are we putting too much emphasis on downtown? Does downtown have a connection to all of LA's communities? What other communities or what other locations and regions in LA would be more representative, or would also represent the histories that you would want to talk about? So where else should we be talking about, or where else did you talk about in your tour? Alan, why don't we start with you?
Let's see. That's a lot of questions.
Well, let me just answer it for you.
Okay.
Because you talked a lot about Koreatown in your
Yes.
tour, right?
Mhm.
Koreatown leading into downtown. So what was
Right.
Koreatown like and who was there? And how does it differ from downtown in your memory?
So I think Koreatown became Koreatown around 1990. And what I mean by that is, I think that's around the time they put the freeway sign that, these
Yeah.
exits are Koreatown. Prior to
Yeah.
that, I'm not sure what it was, but as I mentioned before, up until like the mid 70s, there was a heavily Japanese immigrant population in the area that I'm at, which is like Olympic between Crenshaw and, let's say, Vermont whole area. There was, my Japanese school was off of there on Mariposa, and
Oh, yeah.
there a lot of our family friends had restaurants on Olympic, because we were in the restaurant field, and most of the folks lived somewhere along that corridor. And then if you shoot up Crenshaw, you can go all the way to what's now Martin Luther King. Of course, there's Crenshaw Square, but there were all these Japanese populations around there. That's where the Yellow Brotherhood started, and Elizabeth Ito, who's become quite the animator recently with City of Ghosts. She's from that area. And Tox is still there, even though it's not owned by Japanese Americans from the Holiday Bowl. It's the staff. So, and that menu.
Oh, the staff of the restaurant is
Yeah,
Japanese.
she gave it to the staff basically, or sold it to the staff. But the menu is the Holiday Bowl menu. It's the only thing left of Holiday Bowl other than the memorabilia in the Starbucks. So, but I don't want to give that Starbucks too much credit. So I would defer to Tox as the last living legacy of Crenshaw Square and Holiday Bowl. But there's nothing else left. Everything.
But there is an archive in the Starbucks too, you're saying?
Yeah, there is
Oh,
art.
that's interesting.
Yeah, no, I guess we should give them props. I don't know.
An archive's an archive wherever
Yeah,
you
it
can
is what
find
it
it,
is.
right?
Yeah, I guess so. That's true. You're absolutely right. But everything else is changed quite a bit. So anyway, going back to the area that I live in, I should say I've inherited the house that my grandparents bought. So I have this house. It's a triplex. And it's the house that my grandparents bought when my mom and dad got married, and then my mom became pregnant with me, and then the family was like, well, maybe we should get a bigger place, and then everyone could live in the same place. And that's the house that I've inherited through my family, and I've lived here since 1990, basically. So every time someone dies, and a lot of people have died in this house, fortunately, they leave stuff, and then my family comes, usually my aunts, and they throw everything away. And then I go to the trash can before Friday, or maybe like Thursday night, and I go through everything they're throwing away, and then I collect things, and so I now have a 3-car garage, the original 3-car garage, and it's filled with all this memorabilia. A lot of my work has taken advantage of some of this memorabilia, and then now I'm finding myself at archives, right, doing projects and whatnot. So it's kind of been this trajectory that was never particularly a target I was aiming for, but it's kind of where I found myself. So this area has changed. And I'm always corrected by people who really know where I live. I don't actually live in Koreatown, right? I live in a place where they call it Country Club because it's a
Yeah.
but I don't want to tell anyone that I live in Country Club. That just feels awful, And also, nobody knows where Country Club is, You have to tell them, well, it's right adjacent to Koreatown. So you might as well tell everybody that you live in Koreatown so you can get to more interesting topics in the conversation. So I'm actually technically in between Mid-City and Koreatown.
And in
So,
our area over here, there are so many micro neighborhoods like that. I live
yeah,
in Western Heights, right? Like, who knows where that is?
who knows?
Mhm.
I think this was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was an initiative in the 90s, post LA, insurgents. for the
Rebranding
city.
initiative when they rebranded South Central.
Yeah, well, yeah, and so let's rebrand it. Anybody who wants to
Mm.
rebrand can rebrand, and so there's like these
Mhm.
neighborhood councils, and they rebranded their area, and so you have all these signs everywhere, and it's like, where the hell is that?
Yeah.
It's like I've never heard of that place, but those people are obviously proud and they live in the area. But I was born and raised in Country Club, but I will never tell people in my introduction that that's where I live.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I'm not too crazy about that process. But that process exists in LA. Is that special to us, or do other metropolises have this neighborhood branding process? It's so weird.
Unknown.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Isaac Michael, what parts of the city are significant to the indigenous communities that have been here? Are there
Every-
specific areas? Everything has equal significance?
Everything, yeah, everywhere is a sacred spot. I mean, but for sure, there's different areas that were more known as the center of a village. I don't think we should decenter from downtown in these conversations, because that sounds like giving up space or accepting exclusion to this metropolitan area known worldwide as like the seventh most, what is the city known for? The most gross city in the world, right? But then again, it depends on who the we is that we're referring to. In LA County in general, I mean, LA County is so big, I think there might be some other areas to consider and to add some significance in this project. But yeah, downtown city civic center is, I think it's very important
Yeah.
to not accept exclusion.
Can you tell us a little bit about Yangna, the village that is here?
I don't know where to begin.
Do we know where the sort of the territories boundaries were of what was considered to be that city?
Well, I mean, we could consider, the river, the LA River, that was in close to the area, and like all people, village people were near a river. But when they excavated and dug up areas in downtown to construct new buildings, a lot of the ancestral remains were found, around Grand Park, around Alvarez Street, around Union Station. But that's something to consider when looking at these villages. But it's also, you have to consider, like, okay, was that a burial site specifically, or was that where a mass murder happened? Because I don't think it's not very common for people to bury their relatives under, right next to their houses, right, where they sleep and live. I think it's also important to understand historically, like, this area downtown was known for being a common space where a lot of trade happened between tribes. I mean, if you read about other important leaders from different tribes, I remember reading a biography about Geronimo, a tribal leader in Arizona from the Apache. There's reference to him and his group traveling all the way from over there to trade in Los Angeles, what is now known as Los Angeles. It was a big trade center. It's always been a big trade center. So I think that was something really interesting to learn, is how, historically this has always been a big trade epicenter.
Carmen, Sebastian, do you want to add anything on this question?
Like, oh, go ahead.
About downtown? Go ahead, Carmen.
I think of the off-ramp to 8th Street and like the view of like when I'm on the like freeway that's like right next to downtown, and then there's like the off-ramp that goes to 8th and 9th Street, and just this view of downtown and this sort of emotional connection to like that view that I have. And then there's like the street, I think it's maybe like 7th Street, or like these streets that go from like what is not considered downtown, like downtown adjacent into downtown, either by car or when I'm walking, these like transitions into downtown and out of downtown, or like the tunnels, like 3rd Street tunnel, second, like these moments of like you're entering and you're exiting. They I don't know, they have a certain kind of sense of like distance and closeness from me. Like it allows me to see the city from like these vantage points that, you know, like it kind of frames like you're entering, you're exiting. The idea of even like where you go to work and where you don't go to work, or like these, like there's a certain kind of ordering of structure. And then it was really interesting when the whole, like, I don't know, like branding of like the DTLA, you know, like I was like, what is DTLA? Like, what is that? Like live, work, play. I'm just like, okay, like, listen, like everyone like leaves at like a certain time and then we gather, and like, you know, it's just like, it like is messing with the rhythms.
Mhm.
I
I
don't
mean,
know,
having
like
people there all day long and all night long.
it was, I mean, which was interesting, but it was layering these things, because you have like the flow of people kind of work, like going to work on the bus in the morning, you know, like, and it's like this like rhythm, like really intense. It starts really early, you're there, then you have like the rhythm of like people going out to eat, and like in the cars and the valet, you have the people like like going up and down the escalators in like their suits and like moving around, and then you have like the lunch rush and moving around. So it's like I think about these rhythms within downtown LA and how they sort of all like in like a sort of layer on top of each other, and the movement of that, and I find that really interesting, and how there's like these points of like entering and exiting that also kind of reflect that, create like a psychic space of city, in some way.
Yeah, I think that, like, I guess not to well, yeah, I don't know. I have a lot to think about after Isaac's approach to decentralizing. But maybe I can say expanding this conversation into, I don't know, like a site that like comes up to mind is like the USC area, Olympics area, and like South Central, um, and more like the hoods, and like how that like the metropolitan just like way of look, and like the aesthetics and architecture and business and all that is kind of becoming the look of South Central, or like those hoods or that used to be around in USC. They just look more like touristy appealing. And so just maybe perhaps thinking about those sites, like I don't know. I haven't really done any kind of work in the arts specifically like in the USC area, but I do remember, because I grew up Mormon, we would go to a like where all the Mormon churches would convene, was at this stake center in the USC area, super close. It's like a block from like where the football field is. And so I grew up like seeing the school be small and like that stake there, and then it was still hoodish, but like yeah, still was very hood at the time where we would go, like, and so, and then,
What do you mean by that though, for people who don't understand what you're saying, like when you say hoodish?
just like there was, I just think in regards to like the difference to what it is now, like we see a lot of white students there and like a lot of black and
Gentrification?
black, huh?
Do you mean gentrification or like
Yeah,
diversity?
like gentrification, but also just white students and white people. I don't know where they're coming from. So like,
Mhm.
I think there was just like a lot of black and brown violence, and we also had to be super
Mm-hmm.
like, just like careful where we went and stuff because there was still like violence happening. So yeah, that's what I think about.
Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
even sure that that's really gone away. It's more like USC kind of dominates the visibility of the area.
I do see
But I
that.
mean, certainly like when I worked there, we would hear about, there was actually a really tragic situation where a young man was killed, and it was like, he just didn't know that like as a Black person, he couldn't be in that neighborhood at that time. You know, so it like, because USC has its own version of what the area is, right?
Mhm.
And that's really interesting because like a lot of what we're talking about here is economics and like how, you know, the business drivers, the economic drivers of
Mhm.
the city want the city to be presented a certain way. And yet the
Mhm.
city is so many things. And this leads to a lot of the problems, the conflict, pushing people out of the neighborhoods, pushing homeless people around, all the
Mhm.
things that
Mhm.
happen. You know, I was also thinking about, there's that plaza at John Iso Place, right by Little Tokyo, right, where a lot of people were living. And then all of a sudden there's all these fences up, and now no one can use that space. It's just
Mhm.
not public anymore. And there's still people living there. They're just living basically like in the street now because the safe
Mhm.
place that they had staked out has been taken from them. Right.
Yeah.
So you look at this and you're like, how is this solving the problem? It's just making public space not public,
Mhm.
because the public isn't using it for what they're supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the last question, I'm going to combine two questions because I want to open it also to, we have some great questions from the audience. My question's about monuments because our program is about monuments. And a lot of that was motivated by, as we talked about in the first panel, the removal of monuments at Grand Park. So Isaac Michael, you talked about important histories in Grand Park that precede Grand Park, and when developing the area and finding people, you know, finding potentially evidence of violence, evidence of people's histories there. We've also had monuments removed from Grand Park recently. Christopher Columbus was moved, and then George Washington was removed in a more forceful manner. And we're still negotiating those pieces, those sculptures, what they mean, what their absence means, what should happen. And so that's really what birthed Illuminate LA, is to give a space for that conversation to take place and to maybe pry it open in the public discourse a bit more. And I think that is happening. So question is, you know, is there a value in monuments or that sort of traditional way of commemorating histories in public space? What are the problems with monuments? And this is a way of asking you, what kind of representation do you envision? You're all artists. How would you choose to acknowledge your own histories in the civic landscape? Would it be a monument or would it be some other way?
I can start off.
Please.
I think it's kind of a lot of questions, but I'll just start off somewhere. I think monuments are just a stamp to represent something and someone, or in what way that we all agree about something. So a monument, I can name a tree, an oak tree, as a monument, and representation of a moment, or in representation of a movement, right? I feel like this question is hard. It's kind of problematic personally, because you know, the question was, where's that? There was one part where you said, how do you envision, what was it? How do you envision?
What kind of representation would you envision either creating or just that you imagine that would acknowledge the history
In the
of
civic
modern
space,
landscape? Yeah.
right? Yeah, and that's hard because it's like, just dismantling the artificial space, artificial design and aesthetic in that area would represent the history and my history and my family's history a lot better. And yeah, I have so much going on in my head. Let me just popcorn it to somebody.
Okay, great. And we can come back to you too. if you
Yeah,
have more
we'll jump
questions.
back in.
Great.
Yeah. I'm all for like more water fountains, you know,
Yeah,
and
that's
like
cool.
more bathrooms, you know, because I feel like that allows us to move through the landscape and
Yeah.
not feel forced to like, oh, like let me see if this Starbucks has like a bathroom, you know, like so that we can use public space and you know, without becoming tethered to consumption because of our just physical bodily needs. So I feel like that's a huge way to move forward: water fountains and bathrooms.
Mhm. Alan, Sebastian.
Monuments, I recently was looking at this old file of mine about this conversation I was having with, I'm not exactly sure what it's called. I think it's something like the Venice Japanese American Monument or something like that. It's on the corner of Lincoln and Venice Boulevard. It's kind of an obelisk with these images on it.
Mhm.
And the reason it's there is because that's in that location, all the Japanese were corralled in that area to be picked up by buses to be brought to Santa Anita and then eventually to these camps, these prisons basically during World War II. And so the community raised money and they put this thing up. And it's you know, it's pretty substantial. And I remember in recent years, I was asked to do a sound piece on that corner for an arts event, a Venice or Mar Vista art event. And I said, well, shouldn't we work with the community that put this monument there? And they said, that's a great idea, you know, please contact them. So I contacted them and I came back. And it was a very, like, just took a couple of days because they I think the thing was happening in like a week or two. And then I asked, you know, is there money? Like, I'd like to buy some equipment. And they said, oh no, there's no money for the project. And I was like, wait, you want me to do all this work and you're not gonna, no, I mean, I don't need to get, I would like to get paid, but I'd like to have an equipment budget. And they said, no, you know, we don't have that sort of thing. And I was like, and then so I made a big stink about it, and I eventually pulled out. And later, that community group that put the monument there, they said, Alan, I'm so sorry that didn't work out. You know, we swung by that festival that you were asked to do that project for, and they just put a bunch of food booths in front of our monument during that event. And I thought, what? And so they just completely erased the fact that that was a historic corner for at least, you know, this ugly part of American history.
Mhm.
So in terms of monuments, you know, it's like we could put these things up, but it's how we react to the monument in this case really tells a lot about, you know, where people's heads are at.
Or how we collaborate with others, right?
Or how we don't want to collaborate with them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so you talk a lot about erasure, Michael, and it's still happening, you know. It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
here we are, man. You know, we think, and it's so appropriate. This week, my family's been, you know, hit with the death of Mike Davis, you know, and so he's a friend of our family's, and so it's like, fuck, you know, it's like, excuse me, it's like, you know, oh my god, sorry, you know, it's like we think we're progressing, but then we're not progressing, and how can we progress more? Like,
Mhm.
how can we resolve some of these issues that seem to be happening and that's not, like Sebastian, you were talking about, a white community. Well, this is not a white community I'm talking about. It's a PC, it's a multi-ethnic community that put together that art event. So it's not even that, it's systemic.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sebastian, you want to add something?
Yeah, I did kind of have a pitch perhaps for a new way of thinking about a monument, but like I am obsessed with plants and I'm becoming more obsessed with, and like I went to Ken Gonzalez's house one day a long time ago, and he had an incredibly beautiful like desert garden, which I had never I have never gone into like a big beautiful home in LA and seen such a beautiful like desert garden, or just they just called it a garden, and me
Mhm.
myself was like, this is not a garden, this is like desert plants. But
Mhm.
now looking back on it, like something dedicated to the native plants of like Los Angeles, which are all desert plants, and that feel like, I feel like if the desert plants, which are the native plants of Los Angeles, that's like the start of like life. And it like expanding outwardly, that would be
Mhm.
beautiful as like a monument,
Mhm.
and also just a place of gathering, which is like would be so beautiful to me.
Yeah.
I imagined like
100%, yeah.
like a big square like that, but like desert plants.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
We're hitting into a time, when all these palm trees that were planted in our city and that kind of icon have become this icon, they're all going to die. Like in the next
Yeah.
40 years, they're out of here.
Mhm.
And so the city has already, I believe their landscape program has already said, we're not going to replace those palm trees. So the question is, what are they going to replace it with?
Mhm.
Or are they not going to replace anything? Are we going to go into a zero-scape mode across the entire city? But if something like that, if somebody like Sebastian could create like a vocabulary for the city that would become the new icon for the city, replace the palm tree,
Placing
think-
palm trees with indigenous plants rather than
yeah,
plants that
Mhm.
are, what's the word? Plants that kill other plants, because the palm trees are, that's
invasive.
Mhm.
they're invasive.
They're invasive, yeah.
I think it's a really great way to like think about history through plants. Like
Mm.
my naive, like like early 20s self going into this house, but not seeing like flowers or like green grass at all. I just saw sand and like green cactus and just like the most crazy complex kind of beautiful desert like garden. And so I feel like that would be a good place to start to think about the history of the land that we like inhabit, basically.
Mhm.
Sebastian, when you say Ken Gonzalez, you mean Gonzalez Day?
Yeah, right. He's
The photographer,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
for many years now on his website, he has this map of all of the hangings that have happened in downtown LA. And one of them is the country's largest hanging,
Yeah.
and that's of these Chinese immigrants. Believe it happened in the 1800s. I could be wrong, but I believe one of the nonprofit organizations in Chinatown has everyone seen this? It's an RFP for a monument for that, and
Well, it's so interesting that, the idea of trees as monuments was mentioned. And now we've actually heard different examples of where like the tree itself is a monument, right? Like the palm tree is a monument to colonialism, and then it's going to die.
right.
And we have to decide if we want to resurrect it or if we want to add something else,
No,
or what you're talking about. I really feel like, that is very interesting, that it's not necessarily just what human beings build and put up and venerate that constitutes a monument. Like the tree at Placito Olvera is a monument as well, right? The really old
Mhm.
one that I guess something maybe happened to, I can't remember.
I would
Um,
I would personally love to see the city of Los Angeles make a valiant effort to transport the palm trees of Los Angeles. I don't know what the specific tree is called. We know what it is. It's the palm tree, right? I don't know. That tree that we all know that like is in every picture of Los Angeles that makes it like classic. To get them transported to their native land. I don't know where they're from at all, but
Oh, I heard it was like Argentina,
yeah,
South America, that they were
that
all
would
brought
be
from
the
South
most
America.
beautiful like gesture in the whole wide world if Los Angeles did that, like just transported the trees, uprooted them in the most like beautiful way and like keep them alive and get them back to like their native land. I don't know.
Like reverse
God,
Joseph Beuys.
I'm like such a gatherer and scavenger. I'm already in my imagination. I'm thinking, oh, these palm trees. It's like I want to gather them and make something out of them, you know, just like their leaves, like start like weaving them together or something like I'm like, oh, they're all gonna like, you know, cease to be. So like collect, you know, and
They're almost
transform.
like a relic of this Anthropocene moment that we're in.
Yeah, it's like a
this
collective
misguided landscape of
Yeah.
man-made aspirations.
We could make
Yeah,
a
it's like
10-foot story box and put all the Father Sarah bronzes.
like yeah. Gather all of them.
Yeah.
Love it.
Okay, so I've got some questions from our audience to share with you. And we're coming up on the end of our time together. So the first question is, this was directed for Sebastian, but I think other people can also respond. I heard you comment on not feeling connected to a place. This resonates with me as an immigrant, always in flux between continents. I've realized I carry place or belonging in an abstract way. I wonder, how does you or your work reconcile with not being connected to a physical place?
That's to me.
Yeah, so maybe, can you talk maybe a little bit about how, for example, what went into the decision to do your performance at Naval as opposed to at a specific site when you determined you couldn't really locate and secure a specific site that was historical?
Because the other option for Pistol was that I would do it on the sidewalk and that was public. And I just, you know, as a like trans femme, non-binary person, like I really despise not despise, but it's like a lot to deal with like me being vulnerable in public space. Like I'm already feel kind of like a walking target as soon as I step out of my apartment. Like, so I just decided to stay at Naval instead and have kind of more of a control as to like who comes into the building and feel more like there would be some safety net for me, so I could actually be naked and have these like, well, semi-naked, and have like the muses feel like they're in a safe space, even though we know that that doesn't exist, even, you know, within Naval perhaps. So that was more like of the decision to just be kind of more like more safe instead of like being out in public trying to do something, and also just like was not logistically all that exciting for me.
I guess I would just add to that, you know, because I resonate with that question a lot too, because my own family has such a migratory, transient kind of history, at least the last 2-3 generations. I think that's why I'm so interested in performance art, actually, and sound art that are not so anchored in things and objects, because we don't have a lot of objects. We're not able to keep a physical archive in being forced from our homes, as so many communities have experienced. But we ourselves carry memories, we carry experiences, we carry scars. And that act of walking, right? I think about my grandparents walked from their home in Pakistan across the border to India. Then they were able to get on a bus and go to Delhi, you know, that people walked for transportation, they walked for leisure, that, you know, oftentimes people walked great distances. I was in the Midwest visiting family friends who were also Indigenous this weekend. And, you know, we were in the part of the country where many different Indigenous groups were forced to walk, to relocate to there. Right. And so whether by choice or not, that walking is in fact, like, that's our embodied memory, that's our experience. So I think a lot about that with the kind of artists that I work with, which includes you all, and how ultimately, like when you make your body your instrument in that way, it's also about recognizing that the stories are with us, not necessarily with the archive always.
Yeah.
So I think one of these questions we answered, which was talking about the city before, during, and after COVID and the changes downtown and mass action, political action. Actually, we kind of covered that. So I'm going to skip that one. The trend in LA seems to always have been to tear down. Growing up here in the 60s, so many of the places I remember going to are gone. So we talked a little bit about that too, gentrification and change. Is there anything that you think we should tear down? I think you talked a little bit about maybe, renaturalizing Grand Park as a way to commemorate Indigenous histories. Could we take some of those granite walls out of the park? Make it
Yeah,
more
I can't speak for
natural.
everybody, but I'll speak for myself. I think,
Yeah.
there should be a lot more consultation when tearing stuff down. And I don't know, it's hard. We should tear stuff down that's not being used and that's empty, we should tear stuff down that's bad for the environment or disruptive or unhealthy. We should tear down the concrete walls in the LA River that's making the water evaporate quicker. That's my short answer.
Yeah.
I think City Hall can go.
It's just taking up space.
And that huge LAPD building in front of it.
Stuff like that could also be repurposed, right? I mean, rather than tore down. But Sebastian's like, nah, tear it down.
You can always rebuild things. New energy.
Right, more efficiently. What are your favorite secret places or natural places in LA?
That's a secret. No.
Well, LA River is mentioned.
Yeah.
I love the like tunnel, like the 3rd Street tunnel and the 2nd Street tunnel. It's just amazing. It's like those like transitions, especially like at night, the sound and like the sort of writing on the wall, the layering, the tile, everything is just and I'm not a fan of like they tried to like public art it or something, and I was just like, no, it's like there's like a sign that says like I love LA. I'm like, no, take it out. Like it's perfect as it is. Just like let it kind of continue to layer. So I like moments where there's like layering, many kinds of like people sort of moving, like putting their mark, but also there's an ephemerality to that mark. There's not the assumption of permanence. So I feel like those are the moments that really resonate with me.
All right, one more question and then we'll wrap. So Serena asks, I'm curious if the panels would differentiate monument from memorial. I'm thinking of the artist Sam Durant, who got a lot of deserved backlash in his interpretation of including the image of a gallows that was used to hang 38 Dakota men in, again, late 19th century. Do monument and memorials serve different purposes and people? Who has the right, or would we like to grant the right to memorialize or monumentalize moving forward? So I think this question comes back to what, as Michael said already, which is you have to have consultation. So can you talk a little bit about consultation? I know I've written about the Sam Durant piece in Minneapolis, the Walker Art Center, and I've argued that the biggest issue with it was that there was no consultation with the Dakota people or with the other communities, and that in light of the ongoing uprising at Standing Rock, even more so, that people felt offended that there was no consultation. And they were told that this was somehow meant to represent them. So that's my interpretation of what happened at the Walker Art Center. I know that there's been a lot of discussion here in LA about the need for consultation with Indigenous communities, and Kristen opened our discussion today by talking about closer relationships between the Department of Arts and Culture and the Native American Commission that will provide consultation. So can you orient us a little bit about what is that consultation? What does it look like? What practices should we adopt?
I mean, I think it's really straightforward. It's just bringing people who are a part of the community and represent the community and bringing them to the table to collaborate and to advise on how on certain directions the projects should and should not take.
Mhm.
Makes sense. I mean, it was a great example on how Alan put it with their situation at the monument in Little Tokyo. You know, it's just all about respect. Does anybody else want to fill in on that?
Yeah, maybe Alan, can you talk about it from your perspective as someone who worked for Metro and worked on public art from the producing side too? What happens? Like, why is it harder than we might think to just go ask people? What happens?
I remember the last couple of years I was there. It's been what is 6-7 years now that I left Metro. I remember meeting with the Little Tokyo community, and they really wanted something in the station that should be opening in the next couple of months or next year or whatever for the connector, the regional connector. That they wanted something about Atomic Cafe. And for some reason there was some push from Metro side. I don't know if they didn't want to be told what to do or what was going on there. And I kept telling the people in planning, like, is it a big deal to do this? Like, they just want something, and the neon sign for Atomic Cafe is across the street. It's in the permanent collection of the Japanese American National Museum. You mentioned the houseless folks on at the parking lot. That's been one of the leaders of that is Zen, and Zen's the daughter of Atomic Nancy. I mean, so everyone's still there, right? Like you can get all these people at the table. And I just remember that there was such it was really difficult to get anybody to listen to what the community had to say about that. And so I at some point I was taken off the project, and I didn't really have any power in it to begin with anyway. But I just feel that sometimes, planners and people in government, and I was one of them, you don't want to be, you have this idea of what should happen, and you say you're going to do outreach, and you say you're going to have these community meetings, but it's kind of like really to rubber stamp what you've already put in the grant to the Federal Transportation Administration, right? So I wish that we can kind of start to reevaluate our selection processes. How do we go about these things to have caveats and perhaps more generalized descriptions of how we're going to go about doing things, right? I mean, we don't want to change, but the moment the mayor says, I want this to happen, then everybody panics, right? And then they change everything they've been working on for 5 years. And, I mean, not that happens all the time, but things can change. Why put yourself in that situation? Why not create a process where you have more flexibility? I understand that there are some things you cannot change, like property, right? So if they have an easement, of course you can't buy more real estate, really. Then you're gonna displace businesses and stuff. So I understand that. But within the little guise of your project, to really listen, to be able to cross-reference themes and directions of your project should be part of any taxpayer paid initiative, right?
I think we might want to wrap it there just because we're about to run out of time.
Sorry.
Sounds
So
good.
I want to thank you all again for participating in this project. I want to welcome everyone to listen to the audio tours that we're creating. The first one with Alan Nakagawa will be released next Tuesday, November 1st. And we'll also release the schedule then. The second one will be Sebastian Hernandez, and that one will release in mid-November, followed by Carmen, and then Isaac Michael, and then our final presenter is Mariam Hassanzadeh, who currently works for Metro, and that's why she can't be with us right now, because she's busy opening the connector. That's opening.
Fight the good fight.
So we're really excited to hear from all of you and hear your versions of Los Angeles.
Thank you. Anu.
And for those of you who will be listening, just know that we imagine you can walk, you can bicycle, or you can drive. But we encourage you, however you want to get around, to listen to these tours and take the opportunity to see your city in a new way. Thank you so much to LA County Department of Arts and Culture for having us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Lalenia to close us out.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for participating, especially to our artists and to Anu. As Anu mentioned, please keep a lookout on our Instagram at LA County Arts, our website for upcoming programming for Illuminate LA, and an upcoming call for artists. So thank you all again, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Yeah.
And wait.